What good does paint do in the can? I mean, it was created to be used to provide color, to seal, to cover up scuff marks, to create art and express ourselves. I mean, the paint in the can needs to be applied. We can be adverse to taking action. Some of us fall victim to paralysis by analysis. Maybe the fear of being wrong impedes us. Maybe we feel that we would not apply the paint properly or that somebody else could do a better job. As Les Brown, the motivational speaker, says, and it's a catchphrase I often use, you don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great. We need to act, even if we don't know everything we should or feel as if we aren't completely prepared. Take action. Success is not guaranteed, but inaction will guarantee failure. Those are words spoken by the author Ken Port. Greetings, Coach Moore here, serving as God's Huckleberry to provide some inspiration and guideposts along the journey from where we are to where we need to be. This podcast shares my life experiences, insights gained, and lessons learned, all while demonstrating where God's providence is interwoven through everyday life. And today we're talking about that the paint in the can needs to be applied. Not exactly sure where I first heard the expression, the paint in the can needs to be applied. It's very similar to the expression that a flashlight does no good in the dark if it's not turned on. And I also use an analogy very similar about chocolate milk, right? Just pouring chocolate syrup into milk does not give you chocolate milk. It needs to be activated, energized, stirred up. So there's too many times we hesitate to act or make a decision because we want there to be more information, more training, or the outcome to be guaranteed to be positive. If we act 80% of the time while spending only 20% of the time doing this analysis, and we're correct only half the time we act, that's a 40% success rate. 80% being half right, 40% success. Whereas if we spend 80% of our time analyzing things and only 20% of our time taking action, and we're right 100% of the time, which is highly unlikely, that equals a 20% success rate. So by being more decisive, we are more successful and at least twice as successful. Now, once I worked for a company that operated in that mode of 80% analysis, we were rarely wrong, but we never met our performance goals. And a friend and business colleague of mine, as well as an author, Jim Bearden, says, effort is to theory what aim is to fire. Jim was a Marine, and during his time in the Marine Corps, he intensively trained in marksmanship. And part of that in training included how to hold a good sight picture, with the Marine Corps lingo for take dead aim. But since the objective of marksmanship training is to improve the ability to actually hit targets, taking aim is not enough. At some point, we must pull the trigger and take the shot. We spend a great deal of time learning about theories, be it business success, personal development, even spiritual enhancement. We seem to have a love affair with theory and an aversion to effort. Some of us even become experts on these theories, reciting them chapter and verse. We seem to believe that prolonged or repeated exposure to theory is enough. However, theories do us absolutely no good unless we put them to use out in the real world. We must pull the trigger, or stir the milk, or paint the house. Just attending a webinar or reading the latest blog is not going to make us a better speaker, not going to make us a better craftsman, not going to make us a better salesman, whatever our role is. We need that activation. We need to be stirred up. We need to be energized. We put the training, the theories to work. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, an ounce of action is worth a ton of theory. And a friend of mine, Doran Ancia, who had his podcast, Executive Disciple, he always asked the guest at the end of his podcast to boil down their thoughts into one concept that can be immediately applied. Take action with what you just heard from the lessons provided. Oftentimes we've got resources at our disposal, just like paint in the can, but we don't use them. We've got friends, we've got mentors, colleagues that would be pleased to help us, yet we don't confide in them or maybe trust them to help. Knowing is not enough. We must apply. Be willing is not enough. We must do. This is a quote that's widely attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, but I also saw a reference where it was also attributed to Bruce Lee. But in a similar quote, Tony Robbins says, lots of people know what to do, but few people actually do what they know. Again, knowing is not enough. You must take action. And then there's, if you don't know what to do next, do what you know to do now. It's a line I heard from Father Mike Schmitz in one of his podcasts. Again, take action. And I often cite the words of Mike Tomlin, head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he says, it is not about what you are capable of. It is about what you're willing to do. Capability, that's the paint in the can, which means nothing just sitting in the can. Willingness, that is applying it, the willingness to do. Dreams are the paint in the can of our life. It's important to have them. We need to have the paint in the can, but we don't see the full effect of their beauty until we act upon them. And action is important because we don't want to miss a deadline because of being unsure or analyzing or needing more data. Right? Chances are everything's fine. It might not be the exact shade of robin's egg blue you wanted, but who's really going to notice? And if we're in the middle of a project, finish it. Save the worrying and the second guessing till after it's done. Right? Action eliminates the anxiety. And there's a Navy SEALs quote that says, pain is your friend. It reminds you to finish the job and get the hell home. Finish the project, get it done. Analyze later after the fact. I often blog on the process, and in many cases I refer to it as the journey. But we cannot lose sight of being accountable for outcomes along that journey, right? The room needs painted. The milk needs stirred. I've got blogs titled Waiting on the Fastball, Grinding, or Thinking Green to Tea. And all of these are process-based blogs, but they're focused on breakthrough results through taking action. We need that attitude of I own it. I will deliver. I will get it done. Right? An appealing room for guests should be the goal when we're looking at a can of paint. Yeah, I've shared some quotes already, but there's a multitude of great quotes on this matter. I've got 3 more that I think are worth sharing with you. Action may not always bring happiness, but there is no happiness without action. That's Benjamin Disraeli, former Prime Minister of the UK. There are risks and costs to a program of action, but they are far less than the long-range risks and costs of comfortable inaction. John F. Kennedy. And then a moment of clarity without any action is just a thought that passes in the wind. But a moment of clarity followed by an action is a pivotal moment in our life. And that's by a Mexican author, Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. And Mahatma Gandhi said, prayer is not an old woman's idle amusement. Properly understood and applied, it is the most potent instrument of action. Right? Fervent prayer. It's applying the paint. And God's going to use us to execute his plan. I mean, it is his paint that we apply with our action. We are his paintbrushes. I mean, look at the divine human partnerships at work throughout the Bible. I mean, God used Moses for his courageous leadership. David is a brilliant warrior and statesman. Daniel is a fervent intercessor. And Paul, the most acclaimed scholar in Judaism, who realized that he could do all things only through him who strengthened me. And in the Gospel of Matthew, it's the parable of the talents, where servants have been entrusted with talents. And when the master returns, he wants to know what the servants have done with the talents they've received. And it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 5 talents. It's what we do with the talents that matters. Not everyone gets the same paint or the same amount of cans of paint. God gives each person a unique variety of gifts, and he expects each of us to use whatever gifts he's given us to the best of our ability. We don't need the master returning to see that the paint is still in the can or that the chocolate syrup has yet to be stirred. Like paint, we were created to be used. As we work, God works. As we paint, God guides our brush. We must stir the milk or pull the trigger. Let's get started and apply his paint. Let's answer his call. Let's leave a legacy. Let's make a difference in his kingdom. Rejoice and Godspeed.